Good afternoon, my holy sisters and brothers, and a Gittin Erev Shabbos to you. It's so great to be learning with you on a Friday. Let's light up the darkness. I'm having a good day. You've heard about my gum surgery that I had last week. I finally got those sutures out of my mouth and the putty that was holding them in. I'm thrilled. After this, I'm going to be able to shave for Shabbos. No more non-shaving during the 9 days. I'm excited about that. These are the little things that can give a little bit of joy on a Friday. Shabbos is almost here. We're in that upward trajectory. We come out of Tisha B'Av, the saddest day on the Jewish calendar. The next marker is Tu B'Av, which comes next week, which is a little bit like the Jewish Valentine's Day. The Talmud describes it as one of the most joyous days in the Jewish year, at least back when the temple was standing. It was very special, and we still commemorate it that way. That'll also be the day that I finish saying Kaddish for my mom. That's been quite a journey, saying Kaddish 3 times a day for her. Then we're looking forward to Elul, the month before, the last month of the year, when the king is in the field, right? Rosh Hashanah is when we were all judged, but for that month before Rosh Hashanah, the king is in the field, meaning that God sort of makes God's self more available to us during that month of Elul. So everything is in the ascendant. Who's in the house? Yehudit in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandora in the Bronx, Renee in Indiana, Bella in Florida, Melissa in Great Neck, Gordo in Scotland. It must be Friday. Great to see you here, Gordo. Bill in mid-Missouri, Paula's in the house, Lucy in Minnesota, Karen in Northern California, Hannah in Texas, also Ella and Marjorie and Marie. Welcome, everybody. I'd also like to ask you all, question. I just had a conversation with a Hollywood agent, really just a conversation, regarding our movie, Man in the Long Black Coat, which you've been hearing somewhat about. And we're sort of halfway through our post-production process. The editing is finished, and now we're doing visual effects, sound effects, music, etc., and starting to think about distribution and how that's going to go. And we've said all along, because we have a very good understanding of our audience here at Accidental Talmudist, we would say that of the 1 million people who follow us on Facebook, probably something about, half and probably less than half. I would say less than half are Jewish, maybe 40%. And the majority of the rest are Christian. Who take a serious interest in learning. I know that we all know that Jesus was Jewish. I think that's part of the motivation, but also because our journey through the Talmud takes scripture so seriously. I think that's one of the reasons why. But I'm very curious if there are Christians here watching today. If you can make a little comment, like, what is it that brings you here? What do you find interesting? Because it was no surprise to me and to Nina to hear, one of these Hollywood people. First of all, he actually made the comment to me. I mean, talk about not thinking. Saying to me, religion is for weak people. Strong people don't need religion. I couldn't believe he actually said these words to me. But I think, anyone who's been on this journey for a while sees just how sophisticated, how well thought, how nuanced, the tremendous depth of learning that we have in our tradition, and I'm sure I would say in our respective traditions. And we have so much to learn from each other. And I've said, Jonathan Rumi is a good friend of mine. He played John Wilkes Booth in our movie Saving Lincoln. He plays Jesus in the TV series The Chosen. He played the hippie preacher in the movie Jesus Revolution. And something we've talked about and he's a devout Christian, and something that we talked about is that people of faith from different faiths often have much more in common with each other than they do with people who are sort of from their own community but are not people of faith, if you know what I mean. And I find that very interesting. And for that reason, our movie is not a religious movie, but it does feature a rabbi stepping into the role of detective when the police won't investigate. So he happens to be a man of faith who takes his faith seriously, but is not a religious movie at all. It's just that's who happens to be the detective and who has to, step up, do the investigation, learn how to use a firearm, protect his community. And he builds interesting bridges with Christians and with non-Jews in his community. But at any rate, this idea that religious people are somehow weak, I think it's so telling. It's such an unsurprising attitude to find, in somebody in the Hollywood world. And so egregiously wrong, I think, about who is in America. Whether you live on the coasts or in the middle, there are so many people who take their faith seriously, who are building bridges with other faiths, but who are the last adjective I would use to describe them is weak. I would say curious, open-minded, learning, spiritual, faithful, wanting to grow, etc. So I see some interesting comments coming in, and I'm not going to take too much time to read them now, but I will be reading them later quite carefully. But Bill saying the deep scripture focus was definitely a major draw for me. Also, as a professional theologian, I was drawn by the theological method of the Talmudic sages. Right, beautiful. And Shandora says, a former Christian here, being able to not only learn from the scriptures, but getting an idea of how life was back then. Also finding the background of where these rules we've lived by for so long came from, why and how they were created, and very often how we were getting them all wrong and unsteady building. Paula, I came here because I'm hungry to learn more about my Jewish roots. This is part of my journey. I think we all have different reasons for coming here and learning, but I imagine that we're all on the same page, rejecting this Hollywood observation that people of faith are somehow, weak or need this crutch. At any rate, it's a conversation for another day. But just very interesting, very interesting. And, I think it's such a positive thing that there are more movies. There's a beautiful article in Newsweek that just came out a few days ago talking about this. It's particularly talking about Christian movies, but because of our friendship with Jonathan and watching his movie Jesus Revolution, which you wouldn't expect to hear the accidental Talmudist recommending a movie titled Jesus Revolution, but I will tell you it's a beautiful film, so nuanced. Such a beautiful drama, such great performances. We laughed, we cried, we were deeply moved. And I would say that even though it was about people having a spiritual revival in the 70s, kind of hippies turning away from drugs and toward faith, the characters and their dilemmas had, it was just, I feel like I would call this more of a faith-affirming movie. Right? That when people are sort of operating in a world where they're cognizant of God, there's a level of truth that comes into their lives. And I don't mean the revealed truth of Scripture. I mean that they face themselves like they can't BS, right? They're not going to lie to themselves. When you stand before the Holy One, you can't lie to the Creator, and so you don't lie to yourself. And there's a level of truth that comes into people's lives when faith comes into their lives that is not so much, it's about faith, but it's not, what's beautiful about it goes beyond the faith. It's about people facing who they really are, what they need to do, how they're going to form relationships in their life, how they're going to be true to the people around them. That is just gorgeous, and Jonathan did a great job in that movie. Anyway, I'm getting off track. But I do recommend that movie. And now let's get back to our class. Okay, we are finished. We've picked this up at the bottom of page 68b here in Tractate Gittin. We're in chapter 7, discussing Mishnah number 1. This is the 19th volume of the Talmud, the laws of divorce. But as we've seen so often in this tractate, the sages are ready to go on a big digression at the drop of a hat. We just had a wonderful, wonderful story here on Wednesday. Or I guess it was Tuesday when we met. We read Lamentations on Wednesday about King Solomon and his battle with Ashmedai, the king of the demons, who appears not to be demonic at all. He's probably just an angel charged with dealing with those demonic forces. But that was a very colorful story. And now we pick it up at the bottom of 68b, and we're actually going back to a topic that we opened with a little bit on page, I guess, 67 at the beginning of the chapter. It's actually 67 at the beginning of the chapter, and about remedies and medicine. Now, that's what we're going to do all day today, is talk about Talmudic remedies for certain conditions. Now, if you want to talk about, religious people, they're talking about backward stuff. Here, we're certainly going to hear, the medicine as it was practiced 2,000 years ago, right? So without the benefit of 2,000 years of technological advances since then. And I think that the immediate reaction we might have as modern people is to say, well, that sounds like, crazy stuff and folk remedies and, doing stuff with plants and herbs and living animals and liquids and substances that don't even necessarily come into contact with the part of the body that requires a healing. It sounds crazy to us. But what I want us to remember as we work our way through this page is that the sages are not going to put something, record a discussion in the Gemara if the only, if the only test of it was whether they had heard it from some other rabbi, These remedies got into these pages because they worked. Right? It was a trial and error type of thing that over the centuries, these were remedies that were known to work. So what's fascinating to me as we listen to it is what about these remedies allowed them to work? It seems so contrary to the kind of modern scientific process that we're accustomed to hearing about in clinical trials, etc., and big pharma and all the money that they make going through that and creating these drugs that, work through our system and target the part of the body that is ill. And yet these ancient remedies somehow worked, right? So how is it that they worked? Is it that it just took a lot of time and the body was healing itself? That's a pretty cynical view. Or is it that it was a placebo effect and that the patient knew that something was going on because they were getting involved in the cure? That could also be a slightly cynical view. Or is it that the world back then was, first of all, consistently and throughout all the cultures, a much more spiritual place than today's world? I mean, everybody was adhering to some kind of a faith practice, right? I mean, you had the Jews doing Judaism. By this, you had early Christians practicing Christianity. You had the Zoroastrian religions in Persia, where the Jewish community was, in Bowel. India and China were certainly doing their thing at the same time, though, their practices don't really get into the pages of the Talmud. But when you had such a spiritually oriented culture, I think that people were more tuned in, to these kinds of cures, and they were efficacious for them. So I can't explain any better than that. I'm no expert in this field, but I'd like to just us to keep that in mind as we read these cures, right? They worked. So what is it that was happening in the culture and in these healers that allowed this stuff to work? It's very, very interesting to me for that reason. All right, let's get into it. So we pick it up at the bottom of page 68b, and the Gemara returns to the discussion concerning the different remedies with which our chapter began. As a remedy for a headache, a headache caused by excessive blood in the head. If one has a headache that is caused by excessive blood in the head, let him bring cypress, willow, fresh myrtle, olive, poplar, sea willow, and cynodin grass, and boil them together. And he should pour 300 cups of this liquid on one side of his head, and 300 cups on the other side of his head. And if it is not effective, or he is unable to obtain all these ingredients, then let him bring a white rose, Varda, that stands in one row, meaning that it was growing alone, and he should boil it. And he should pour 60 cups on this side of his head and 60 cups on this side of his head. And as a remedy for a migraine headache, let him bring a wild rooster. This is the dukifat bird that we learned about a few days ago, and slaughter it using a silver dinar so that the blood flows over the side of his head that hurts him, the one with the headache. And he should be careful of its blood so as not to blind his eye. And he should hang it on the doorpost of his house so that when he enters, he rubs against it, and when he exits, he rubs against it. Now we're on 69a. As a remedy for eye disease, Beroketi, let him bring the body of a 7-colored scorpion, dry it in the shade, and grind together 2 portions of stibium and 1 portion of the dried scorpion. And let him place 3 eye brushes full in this eye and 3 eye brushes full in that eye, but he should not place more, as if he does not heed this advice and he does place more, his eye will burst. Now, I think another thing to remember when we're reading this, for example, you could have 2 different cooks use the same recipe, right? And one is myself, a very amateur cook, who cooks some things now and then. Nina's like infinitely better cook than I am. But okay, I could follow a recipe, and I could, make a meal based on a recipe that I followed. But then you take Nina following the same recipe, or let's say a professional chef, with a big education who's been working as a chef in a restaurant for 20 years, and he follows the same recipe or she follows the same recipe. Yeah, this is good. They're going to produce 2 different dishes. Likewise, I would say that many of these remedies, as they're spelled out here, it's like a basic recipe that's listed in the Talmud, but it was for the purpose of an experienced practitioner to put it into effect. And all of his experience or her experience and nurturing ability, that bedside manner, but even just the very physical, technical ability to deal with these ingredients, I'm sure there's just a lot more to it than the simple listing of the recipe that we're reading here. As a remedy for night blindness, he should bring a rope of animal hair, shudra barka, and he should tie one of his legs and one leg of a dog together with the rope, and let children throw pottery shards behind him, and let them say to him, "The dog is old and the rooster is foolish." And let him take 7 pieces of raw meat from 7 houses, and let him leave them for him in the socket of the door, and let him then eat them in the junkyard of the city. Afterward, he should untie the rope of hair and say as follows: "The blindness of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, leave so-and-so, son of so-and-so." And then they say, "Let them blow into the dog's eye." As a remedy for day blindness, translated here as hemerolopia, which is the inability to see clearly in bright light, which I got to tell you, as you get older, it becomes more of a thing, I need sunglasses more when I'm outdoors than I used to. So, person who has this struggle, day blindness, let him bring 7 animal spleens and let the patient roast them on the pottery shard of a bloodletter. And let the patient sit on the inside of the house and let another person sit on the outside and let the patient say to himself, blind man, give me something to eat. And let the other one say to the patient, seeing man, take and eat. And after the patient eats, let him break the shard, as if not, the blindness will follow him. As a remedy for a nosebleed, let the patient bring a man named Levi, who is a priest. And that man should write for the patient the name Levi backward. And if the patient is not able to do this, let him bring an ordinary man, and let that man write for the patient the following expression: I am Papi Shela Bar Sumake, and that man should also write this backwards. And if he's not able to do this, right, so that not everyone has access to the same kinds of doctors and treatments. So if these are not possible, if he's not able to do this, then let that man write for the patient like this: taste from a bucket in silver water, taste from a bucket in tainted water. And if the patient is not able to do this, let him bring the root of fodder, aspasta, rope, ashla, from an old bed, and paper, kutessa, and saffron, and the red portion of a palm branch, and let him burn them with each other. And let the patient bring a fleece of wool, and spin it into 2 strings, and let him soak, litmish, them in vinegar. Roll them in this ash of the burned materials, and place them in his nostrils. And if the patient is not able to do this, let him look at a stream of water flowing from the east toward the west, and let him spread his legs and stand with 1 foot on this side and 1 foot on that side, and let him take clay in his right hand from under his left foot, and let him take clay with his right hand from under his left foot, and let him take clay with his left hand from under his right foot. And let him spin 2 strings of wool, soak them in the clay, and place them in his nostrils. And if the patient is not able to do this, let him sit under the gutter, and let them bring water and pour it on him, and let them say, just as the water has ceased, let the blood of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, cease. As a remedy for... and by the way, so-and-so bar so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, we might just start saying the Hebrew version of that, Ploni bar Ploni, right? So Ploni means, it's just like a generic name. You're just talking about somebody, but you say Ploni bar Ploni, Ploni the son of Ploni, and it's a fair translation. So-and-so, the son of so-and-so. At any rate, where am I? Okay, as a remedy for blood that comes from the mouth, we check the patient with a straw of wheat. If the blood sticks to the straw, then it comes from his lungs, and it has a remedy. But if the blood does not stick to the straw, it means that the blood comes from the liver, and it has no remedy. Rav Ami said to Rav Ashi, but didn't we learn the opposite in a Mishnah, Hulin 42a? If the liver was completely removed and none of it remains, then it is considered to be an animal with a condition that will cause it to die within 12 months, a treifa. Meaning that it is not kosher because it would have died anyway within 12 months. And so even though you slaughter it with a kosher slaughter, the fact that it would have died, it had already had a condition that would cause its death, renders it non-kosher. That's called a treifa. Where am I? Right, didn't we learn the opposite? So if the liver was removed from an animal and none of it remains, then this is a treifa. The animal cannot live without its liver, even though it might not die immediately. But in the case of a lung that is punctured or missing, I'm confused. That's if the liver was removed, then it's a treifa. But in the case of a lung that is punctured or missing, the animal is a treifa, even if it has not been completely removed. And this indicates that damage to the lung is more serious than damage to the liver. I'm a little confused by this because both conditions amount to being the animal being a treifa. So I'm not sure. Oh, I see what they're saying. what they're saying is that if even a partial liver remains, then the animal is not a treifa. But if the lung is at all damaged, then the animal is a treifa. So it would seem that the lung of an animal is more delicate than the liver. So this indicates that damage to the lung is more serious than damage to the liver. So Rav Ashi said to him, since the blood comes out from this person's mouth, one must say that the liver has dissolved and he will not survive. Now the master said, if blood comes from the lungs, then it has a remedy. And the Gemara asks, what is the remedy? And the Gemara answers, let him bring 7 fistfuls of sliced beets and 7 fistfuls of sliced leek and 5 fistfuls of perida grass, 3 fistfuls of lentils and a fistful of cumin and a fistful of ropes and a corresponding amount of the intestines of a firstborn animal. And let him cook it all together and let him eat everything. And afterward, let him drink good strong beer. Now, with regard to the remedy for the pain in one's teeth, I was curious about this when I read it. Rabba bar Rav Huna said, let him bring an individual garlic that grew as a single clove and grind it with oil and salt and let him place it. Now, the pain is in his teeth, but he grinds this garlic that grew singly with oil and salt, and then he places it on the thumbnail of the side of his body that hurts him, of the teeth in his mouth, and let him surround that garlic mixture with a rim of dough. And he should take care that it does not touch his flesh, but only his fingernail, because it can cause boils if it comes into contact with the flesh. Now, I don't think that means that garlic with oil and salt on your skin will ordinarily cause boils, but if it's being used in this medicinal manner, and again, I think there's a lot more to the preparation of these substances than we're getting in this very concise, sort of bullet points type recipes that we're reading here, that then it could be harmful to the skin. At any rate, with regard to the remedy for gums, right? Somebody's having a problem with their gums in their mouth. Rabbi Yochanan said, the Spanish chamomile plant is like the mamru plant, and the root of the Spanish chamomile is preferable to mamru, and let him take it in his mouth. And this is meant to stabilize the illness so that it does not intensify. To boil them, meaning to cause the wounds to open so that the pus can be removed from them, let him bring the coarsest bran found at the upper portion of the sifter, and lentils in their dirt, and fenugreek, and the flower of the hop plant, and let him take an amount about the size of a nut in his mouth. In order to open the blisters and remove the pus, let his friend blow white cress into his mouth with a straw of wheat. And if he wishes to heal the blisters, let him bring dirt found in the shade of the bathroom and knead it with honey and eat it, as this is effective for curing the blisters. For a bronchial infection, let him bring a nut-sized amount of ammonia and a nut-sized amount of sweet galbanum, and a large spoonful of white honey, a vessel from Mechoza, one that holds a quarter lug of liquid, full of clear Nikita wine, and let him boil them together. And once the ammonia is cooked, everything will have cooked. And if he is not able to do this, let him bring a quarter lug of milk from a white goat. Now we're on 69b. And let him drip it on 3 stalks of cabbage and stir it with a sprig from a marjoram bush. And when the sprig of marjoram is boiled, all of it will be boiled. And if he's not able to do that, let him take the feces of a white dog and let him mix it with balm. And as much as possible, let him not eat the feces because it causes separation of the limbs. I think we can all agree, don't eat feces. With regard to a remedy for a stinging pain, gira, let him bring a stone called an arrow of Lilith. Arrow of Lilith. Rashi and the Aruch explain that this means a stone that looks like an arrow that fell with hail. So let him bring a stone called an arrow of Lilith and let him turn it upside down and let him pour water on it and drink it. And if he's not able to do that, let him bring water from which a dog drank at night. And let him be careful about leaving the water uncovered at night in case a snake drank from it and left its venom in the water. A remedy for drinking uncovered water is to drink a quarter log of undiluted wine. Now, by the way, this is something that you find often in the Talmud. Do not drink water that has been left sitting around uncovered for an extended amount of time. The explanation usually given is that a snake might have come in, taken a drink from the water, and left some of its venom in there. Now, that might be sort of their understanding of bacteria, right? And other types of microscopic disease carriers that they were not aware of back then, but that they sort of equated with an unseen deposit of something that is venomous, that is harmful. But that is very good advice. Don't drink water that's been left around uncovered. As a remedy for a pus-filled wound, one should drink a quarter lug of wine steeped in a red ice plant. As a remedy for palpitations of the heart, i.e., if his heart is beating too fast, let him bring 3 loaves of barley and soak them in kamka, from which 40 days have not yet passed since being made, and let him eat the loaves and drink diluted wine after consuming them. Rav Acha of Difti said to Ravina, all the more so his heart will palpitate from these foods. Ravina said to him, you misheard what I said. I said this as a remedy for heaviness of the heart. As a remedy for palpitations of the heart, let him bring 3 loaves of wheat, soak them in honey and eat them, and let him drink undiluted wine after them. As a remedy for heart pain, let him bring 3 egg bulks of mint, and an egg bulk of cumin, and an egg bulk of sesame seeds, and let him eat that together. As a remedy for pain of the intestines, let him bring 300 long peppers, and every day let him drink 100 of them with wine. It is told Ravin of the city of Nerish prepared 150 of our, i.e. Babylonian peppers, for the daughter of Rav Ashi who had this illness, and she was healed. Again, as crazy as these remedies sound to the modern ear, the reason they're recorded here is because over centuries they worked, right? Over much extended amount of time of trial and error, these remedies were found to work, right? And so the question is, was there something about the world back then that was different? Perhaps people believing in the power of these cures to be effective, somewhat on the physical level, somewhat on the spiritual level. Also, were the practitioners of medicine who were preparing these substances, also very in tune with the patient and how to, relate to the patient in applying the cure. But again, it's just worth remembering that these cures worked. Now, I don't think that we are living in a different world and we have lost the knowledge of how to make these preparations, so we can't just follow these recipes and turn them into cures. But, I think we're probably all of us aware of certain, we call them folk remedies, that were highly effective. And those are passed down from family to, through families, within families. And there's all kinds of stuff that works, so worth remembering. Now, as a remedy for roundworm, he should drink a quarter lug of wine steeped in laurel leaves. As a remedy for white worm, let him bring cress and tie with a piece of woven cloth, and let him soak it in water and drink it. And let him be careful with the seed, as if he is not careful enough, there's a danger that it will grow inside him and puncture his intestines. The remedy to bind the bowels, meaning cure diarrhea, is to consume the chamomile plant when it is wet with water. And the remedy to relax the bowels and relieve constipation is to drink dry chamomile soaked in water, which acts as a laxative. And your mnemonic, so as not to confuse these remedies, is as follows: wet grass, itza, that is used to dam rivers, and through this he will remember that moist chamomile is used to stop diarrhea. As a remedy for illness of the spleen, let him bring 7 leeches, dry them in the shade, and every day drink 2 or 3 of them with wine. And if he is not able to do this, let him bring the spleen of a female goat that has not given birth, and place it in the oven, and stand across from it, and let him say, just as this spleen is dried, so shall the spleen of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, be dried. And if he is not able to do this, let him place the goat's spleen between the bricks of a new house, and let him say the same statement. And if not, let him search for someone who died on Shabbos, and let him take the hand of the deceased, and let him place it on his spleen and say, just as the hand of so-and-so was dried, so too the spleen of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, should be dried. And if he is not able to do this, let him take a fish and roast it in the house of a blacksmith, and let him eat it with the water from the blacksmith's house in which the red-hot metal is cooled, and let him drink water from the blacksmith's house. And the Gemara brings corroborative evidence to this remedy. A certain goat drank water from the blacksmith's house, and when it was slaughtered, it was found to have no spleen inside of it. And if he is not able to do this, let him open a barrel of wine for his sake, i.e., let him drink a large amount of wine. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, if he has a barrel of wine, he will not come before my master for a remedy, as the wine will already have healed him. Rather, what should he do to maintain his health? Let him become accustomed to eat bread in the morning, because it benefits the entire body. As a remedy for hemorrhoids, let him bring acacia and aloe and mercury and silver dross and a bundle of fragrant herbs and feces of pigeons. And let him take it in linen bags in the summer or cotton bags in the winter and place them on the afflicted area. And if he is not able to do that, let him drink diluted beer. For rheumatism, let him bring a vessel full of brine from a small fish and roll it 60 times on his thigh, and roll it 60 times on this thigh and 60 times on that thigh. As a remedy for bladder stone, litzmireta, let him bring 3 drops of tar oil, which is oil that emerges from burning wood, 3 drops from the squeezing of leeks, and 3 drops of clean wine, and place this mixture for a man on the penis and for a woman on her genital area. And if he cannot do this, let him bring the ear, i.e. the handle of a wine sack, and suspend it for a man from his penis and for a woman from her breasts. And if he is not able to do this, let him bring a crimson string spun by a woman suspected of prostitution, who is also the daughter of a suspected woman, and let him suspend it for a man from his penis and for a woman from her breasts. And if not, what are we curing here? Bladder stone, right? So I guess like kidney stones or bladder stone, whatever that is. And if not, let him bring a louse from a male and a louse from a female and suspend it for a man from his penis and for a woman on her genital area. And when he urinates, let him urinate on a dry branch by the door pivot, I guess the door hinge, and let him examine the bladder stone that comes out of him with urine. I guess we are talking about kidney stones. As it is effective as a remedy for any illness that is accompanied by fever if he grinds it and uses it. Now, as a remedy for an external fever, let him bring 3 sa of date pits and 3 sa of leaves of an elder tree. Let him cook each one individually and sit between them. And let him place them in 2 basins, and bring a table and place it over him, and let him stand up from over this basin and sit over this basin, and then let him stand up from over this basin and sit over this basin until the heat rises on him and he becomes very hot. And let him wash from the water of both basins, and when he drinks, let him drink from the basin containing the Eder water, but do not let him drink from the basin containing the date water, because it causes infertility. And as a remedy for internal fever, let him bring 7 handfuls of beet leaves from 7 furrows, and let him cook them with their dirt and eat them, and let him drink from Eder leaves mixed with beer, or grapes grown by trellising the vine on a palm tree soaked in water. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. As a remedy for lichen planus on one's skin, known as chazazita, let him bring 7 large wheat kernels, and let him roast them over a fire on the blade of a new hoe, and let him extract oil from the wheat and rub it onto his skin. And it is told that Rav Shimi bar Ashi used this remedy for a certain Gentile who had something else, meaning leprosy, and he was healed. Shmuel said, one who is struck with Persian spears will not live long afterward, as he will certainly die from this wound. In the meantime, they should force feed him fatty meat that was roasted over coals and undiluted wine. And if they do this, it is possible that he will live for a little longer and have time to instruct his household with regard to what they should do after his death. And finally, similarly, Rav Edi Bar Avin said, one who swallowed a hornet will not live. In the meantime, they should give him a quarter log of sharp vinegar to drink. And if they do this, it is possible that he will live for a little bit longer and have time to instruct his household with regard to what they should do after his death. And that concludes our journey through page 69 here in Tractate Gittin. Let me see if I can answer a few questions or comments. Ooh, load. Okay. Nina says, no questions, but many comments about natural remedies, and here are some. Yehudit. The sages knew something. Many drugs today derive from plants. For example, for one of the ingredients in the chemo drug Taxol is derived from the bark of the Pacific yew tree. Thank you. Sharon, almost all our cancer and complex medical conditions have remedies derived from rainforest and from primitive sources that have been chemically determined to be effective treatment, only identified by chemical nomenclature. Fascinating. Thank you, Sharon. Renee, from how to catch the king of demons to ancient remedies in just 2 days. I loveth this class. Me too. Shandora, the spleen cleans the blood. That blacksmith water would have additional iron and be sanitized from the heat. Fascinating. And Leona, peppers contain I'm sure I'm pronouncing this wrong, capsaicin, which is very good at treating and curing stomach and digestive system issues. There you go. So you see that it sounds crazy to us, but there's no question that all of these remedies were proven to be effective over time, and how fascinating that some of the plant and even animal substances that were used in these remedies have over time and the advent of the industrial age and the scientific age proven themselves and have been adapted into medicines with chemical sounding names, but really are not so far distant from the remedies we're reading about here. We'll have more to discuss, God willing, together tomorrow night, Saturday night, after Shabbos ends here in LA. Shabbos is starting to end a little earlier now, and I hope to get on the air by 9:30 and maybe even a little earlier by 9:20 p.m. tomorrow night. May we all be blessed with a beautiful, meaningful, uplifting, rejuvenating Shabbos. All the best. Good Shabbos.